Welcome to the Complete JavaScript course. In this course, we're going to learn how to build complex websites using JavaScript from a beginner to a professional level. And by the end of this course, we're going to build Amazon.com. So this is an interactive multi-page website where we can add products to our cart, create an order, and even track our order. Along the way, we're also going to build some smaller projects like a rock, paper, scissors game, a to-do list, and a calculator. Now, you don't need any previous coding or technical experience to follow along. This course will cover everything that you need to learn JavaScript. We're going to start from the very basics of JavaScript, and we're going to build our way up step by step. We're going to learn the major features of JavaScript and also how to use JavaScript together with other technologies like HTML and CSS. We're also going to learn more advanced features like object-oriented programming, backend, callbacks, promises, and async await. And we'll use these features together to build a complex project, which is the Amazon project. This will let you practice what you learn and deepen your understanding. You can find the different lessons of this course below the video here and here. If you need to, you can adjust the speed of the video here. And after each lesson, I'm going to give you a bunch of exercises that you can do on your own to practice the skills that we learned. In total, this course will have over 250 exercises. So with that said, let's get started. Before we begin, if something in this course is not working properly, make sure to check the first comment below the video for a list of solutions. I'm going to be doing this course on Windows, but the steps are the same if you're using a Mac. We're going to start from the very basics of JavaScript and build our way up step by step. First of all, what is JavaScript? JavaScript is a technology that we use to create websites. A website is like YouTube.com or Amazon.com. It's how we access YouTube and Amazon on our computer. If we were using a phone, we usually use an app, but on our computer, we use a website. So there's actually three technologies that we use to create websites: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Each of these technologies has a specific purpose when creating a website. HTML creates the content of a website. It creates all the buttons, the text, and the images. CSS changes the appearance of the website. By adding CSS, we can make our website look nice. And finally, JavaScript makes our website interactive. So if we only have HTML and CSS, and we click one of these buttons, our website doesn't do anything. But once we add JavaScript, we can make our website do something when we click a button, such as add a product to our cart or create an order. So this course is focused on JavaScript. If you want to learn HTML and CSS in more detail, I have a full course just like this one that you can find in the video description. Let's get started with JavaScript. The first thing we need to do is to install a piece of software called a web browser. A web browser lets us view websites that we create in this course. The most popular web browser for web development is Google Chrome, so I recommend using that. If you don't have Google Chrome, you can open the default web browser on your computer. For Windows, it's Microsoft Edge, and for Mac, it's Safari. Type in google.com at the top and press enter. Search for Google Chrome. Click the result and follow the instructions to download and install. Once we've installed Chrome, we're ready to begin. We're going to start by learning what exactly is JavaScript and how does it work. The easiest way to understand JavaScript is we're basically giving instructions to a computer, and then the computer follows our instructions. I find the best way to learn this is to jump in and give it a try. So first, let's open Google Chrome. Next, we're going to click at the top here and type supersimple.dev/js-basics and press enter. And now we'll learn how to give our computer some instructions to follow. To do that, we're going to go to a blank area of the web page. We're going to right-click, click Inspect, and then click the Console tab. Now, if your console doesn't show up at the bottom like this, you can click these three dots here, and then select this icon. Okay, so inside the console, we can give some instructions for our computer. Let's learn our first instruction. We're going to type here, and we're going to type alert, open bracket, single quote, hello, single quote, close bracket, and semicolon. Make sure to type this out exactly as I have it here. In JavaScript, if you don't type things out correctly, it won't work. So this is an instruction to create a pop-up with the text hello inside. To get the computer to follow our instruction, we can just press enter. And as you can see, the computer does exactly what we tell it to do. It creates a pop-up with the text hello inside. Now let's press OK. And let's give another instruction to the computer. So we're going to type here again, and we're going to type alert again, open bracket, single quote, but this time we're going to type a different message in the pop-up. Good job, and single quote, close bracket, and semicolon. So this is an instruction to create a pop-up again, but this time with the text good job inside the pop-up. If we press enter, the computer does exactly what we tell it to do, and it creates a pop-up with the text good job inside. And that's basically the main idea behind JavaScript. We're giving instructions to a computer, and then the computer follows our instructions. So note that we can open and use this console on any website. We're just using supersimple.dev as an example. Let's press OK. And we're going to learn some terminology, or naming. The instructions we give to our computer, these instructions are called code. When we press enter and the computer follows our instructions, this is called running the code. Now, there are many different languages we can use to write code, called programming languages. It's similar to how we have many human languages that we can use to communicate. Some examples of programming languages are JavaScript, Python, and Java. So here, we're writing our code using the JavaScript programming language. So we call this JavaScript code. Now that we understand the basic terminology, let's look at some more examples of what we can do with JavaScript code. Another thing we can do is math. Let's go back to the console and type here, and we're going to type 2 plus 2. So this is an instruction or code that tells the computer to do some math, to calculate 2 plus 2. When we press enter, the computer follows our instruction or runs this code, calculates 2 plus 2, and gives us the result, which is 4. Let's do another example. We're going to type 10 minus 3 and press enter to run this code. Again, the computer does this math, calculates the result, and gives us 7. So as you can see, JavaScript can do many different things, like create pop-ups and do math. Let's look at one more example of what JavaScript can do. We're going to go to the bottom and type out this code. document dot body dot inner capital HTML equals single quote hello single quote and semicolon. Make sure to write this out exactly as I have it here, with the dots and the capital letters, because JavaScript is case sensitive. Let's press enter to run this code. What this code does is that it removes everything on the page and replaces it with the text hello. In this example, we use JavaScript to modify the web page. Modifying the web page is one of the most important features of JavaScript, and we're going to be using this feature throughout this course. And that's the basics of JavaScript. We're giving instructions to a computer. These instructions are called code, and then the computer follows our instructions. This is called running the code. And also, don't worry about memorizing all this code. You can find a copy of all the code that we write in this course in the video description. Now that we understand the basics of JavaScript, let's learn more about the JavaScript language itself. If we take a look at this code, alert and hello, you might be wondering what the brackets and the quote mean. All of these characters have a special meaning in the language. This is something called syntax. Syntax are the rules that we have to follow when using a programming language like JavaScript. This is sort of like in English, we also have rules that we follow called grammar. The difference is that in English, we don't have to follow the rules of grammar perfectly. People can still understand us. But in programming, we have to follow the rules of syntax exactly. Otherwise, the computer won't understand our code. For example, if we scroll down and we type this code, alert, open bracket, quote, hello, quote, close bracket, and semicolon, but this time we remove the first bracket and press enter, it will give us a syntax error. We're not following the rules of syntax, so the computer doesn't understand this code. Now, JavaScript has a lot of syntax rules, and we can't learn them all at once right now. Instead, we're going to learn the syntax rules one by one as we go through the course. For now, we'll just learn enough syntax to do the exercises at the end of this lesson. What we need to know is that if we scroll up, this part of the code tells the computer to create a pop-up. The text between these quotes is the text inside the pop-up. If we change this text, we can change the text inside the pop-up. Same thing for this code down here. If we change the text between the quotes, it will change the text that appears on the page. And that's all we need to know about JavaScript syntax for now. We'll learn exactly what the other characters like the brackets, quotes, and semicolon mean later on in this course. So in this lesson, we learned that JavaScript is basically giving instructions to a computer. We wrote our first few lines of JavaScript code. We learned how to run our code using the console in our web browser. And we learned about syntax, which are the rules that we have to follow when writing our code. Thanks for watching this course so far. If you want to support this channel, you can check out the premium version of my courses just like this one, where you can get a certificate of completion and a better learning platform. If you're interested in extra videos from me, more in-depth videos, and behind-the-scenes content, you can check out these links here. You can also support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing this video with others. Thanks again, and let's continue with the course. Here are some exercises you can try on your own to practice what we learned in this lesson. You can find the solutions to these exercises in the video description. Now that we understand the basics of JavaScript, we're going to learn about each feature of the language. In this lesson, we're going to focus on numbers and math. First, we can close the console for now. So I've actually prepared a project that we can use for this lesson. To open this project, we're going to go to our browser, click up here, and type supersimple.dev/projects/Amazon and press enter. So this is actually the final project we're going to create in this course. This is an e-commerce website similar to Amazon where we can add products to our cart and then view our cart by clicking the top right. And on this page, we can see the products in our cart, modify our cart, and create an order. For this lesson, we're going to focus on this right section, which calculates the cost of our cart, including the cost of the products, shipping, and taxes. This section is a great way to learn numbers and math in JavaScript. First, let's open the console again so we can write JavaScript code. We're going to find a blank area of the web page, right-click, click Inspect, and then click the console. So we already saw some examples of math in the previous lesson. For example, we wrote the code 2 plus 2. If we press enter, the computer adds these two numbers and results in 4. We also did 10 minus 3. If we press enter, the computer subtracts these two numbers and gives us 7. In addition to adding and subtracting, we can also multiply and divide. To multiply, we're going to type 10 star 3 and press enter. So star is the character for multiplying. To divide, we're going to type 10/2 and press enter. So / is the character for dividing. Now let's learn the syntax rules for numbers and math. The syntax for math is pretty straightforward in JavaScript. We just write it out like normal math. We can also do math with more than two numbers. For example, we can add 2 plus 2 and then plus another 2. If we press enter, the computer will add these three numbers together and result in 6. And finally, JavaScript can handle decimal numbers like 2.2 plus 2.2. If we press enter, it will calculate these decimal numbers and result in 4.4. Now let's do some practical examples. We're going to calculate the numbers here in our final project. But first, let's set up our cart so we have the same products in our cart. So make sure in your cart you have 2 socks with free shipping and you have 1 basketball with $4.99 of shipping and nothing else in your cart. If you need to, you can modify your cart by clicking update or delete, or by going to the home page by clicking in the top left and adding any products that you're missing. Once you have the same products as me in your cart and you have the same numbers on the right, we're ready to begin. Let's start by calculating this number up here. This is the cost of the products before shipping and taxes. To calculate this number using JavaScript, we're just going to add the cost of the products. So in our console, we're going to add the cost of the socks, which is $10.90. We have 2 of them, so we're going to multiply this by 2. And then we're going to add the cost of the basketball. So plus $20.95. If we press enter, the computer will do this math calculation and give us this number. And if we scroll to the top of our project, you'll see that the number that we got matches what we have on the page. So that's how we use JavaScript to calculate this number here. Let's do another example. We're going to calculate this third number, which is the cost of the products plus shipping. Feel free to pause the video if you want to try it yourself first. Otherwise, we'll do it together. Let's go back to our console, and we're going to add the cost of the products again, which is $10.90 times 2 plus $20.95. But this time, we're going to add the cost of shipping, which is $4.99. So 4.99, and press enter. The computer will do this calculation and give us this number, which matches what we see in the final project. Next, we're going to learn a very important feature of math called the order of operations. Adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, these are called operations, and the characters in the middle are called operators. Now, there's a certain order that we do these operations. For example, if we go back to our console and type the calculation 1 plus 1 times 3 and press enter, notice that it multiplies 1 times 3 first, which equals 3, and then adds 1, which equals 4. Notice that it does not add 1 plus 1 first, which equals 2, and then 2 times 3 equals 6. The way math normally works is that multiply and divide are done first. Add and subtract are done after. This is called the order of operations, and JavaScript follows the same rules. Multiply and divide are done first. Add and subtract are done after. The order of operations is also called operator precedence in JavaScript. One thing to note is that multiply and divide have the same priority. So if we have both in a calculation, it will calculate from left to right. Add and subtract also have the same priority. If we have both in a calculation, it will also calculate from left to right. Another feature of the order of operations is that we can use brackets to control which part of the calculation gets done first. For example, let's type out this calculation again. 1 plus 1 times 3. But this time, we're going to add an open bracket and a close bracket around 1 plus 1. If we press enter, now the calculation inside the brackets will be done first. So it will add 1 plus 1 equals 2, and then 2 times 3 equals 6. So when we use brackets, JavaScript will always do the calculation inside the brackets first, and then do the rest of the calculation. Brackets have the highest priority in the order of operations. Now let's learn the syntax rules for brackets. So we just have to have a matching open bracket and close bracket. So something like this doesn't work because we have 2 open brackets and no close bracket. We also need to have a complete calculation in the brackets. So this also doesn't work because 1 plus 1 multiply is not a complete calculation. Now let's do some practical examples using the order of operations. First, we're going to do some more setup in the final project. So we're actually going to remove all the products in our cart. And then once our cart is empty, we'll go to the home page by clicking the top left. And this time, we're going to add some new products. So we'll add 1 basketball and 2 t-shirts. Now let's go back to our cart by clicking the top right. We'll scroll down, and we're going to calculate the numbers in this section again. Let's calculate this number at the top, which is the cost of the products. We'll go back to our console and add the cost of the basketball, which is $20.95, plus the cost of the t-shirts, which is $7.99. And we have 2 of them. So we'll multiply this by 2. If we press enter, this will give us the number that we see in the final project here. Notice that in this calculation, we're taking advantage of the order of operations. Even though multiply is written last, we still multiply these 2 numbers first. So we calculate the cost of 2 t-shirts first, and then we add the cost of the basketball after. Okay, now let's try something a little more difficult. We're going to learn how to calculate this 10% tax here. So how do we calculate 10% of something? Unfortunately, we can't just multiply by 10% in JavaScript. Instead, we have to calculate the percent manually. So how do we do that? 1% is actually equal to 1 divided by 100. That's what percent means. So 10% is equal to 10 divided by 100, which equals 0.1. So to calculate 10% manually, we just multiply this number by 0.1. So we'll type 36.93 multiplied by 10%, or 0.1. If we press enter, it will give us a number that is close to what we have in the final project. It's the same amount of money, but our number is more accurate than we need. So later in this lesson, we'll learn how to round this number down to exactly what we have on the web page. For now, let's do some more practice with the order of operations. Let's calculate the tax again, except instead of using the final number, 36.93, let's calculate this number individually, like here. So at the bottom, we're going to add the cost of the basketball, 20.95, plus the cost of the t-shirts, 7.99 times 2, and then multiply this by the tax percent, times 0.1, and press enter. Unfortunately, this number doesn't match what we got up here. And that's because if we look at this calculation, according to the order of operations, multiply is done first. So it will multiply these 3 numbers first, and then add 20.95 after. However, this is not what we want. We actually want to calculate this number first. This is the cost of the products. So how do we get the computer to calculate this first, and then multiply by the tax percent 0.1? To do this, we can use brackets to control which part of the calculation gets done first. So let's create this calculation again. 20.95 plus 7.99 times 2. But this time, we're going to add brackets around this part of the calculation to make sure that this gets calculated first. And then at the end, we'll multiply it by the tax percent 0.1. And now if we press enter, we will get the same number that we had before. So that's how we use math and the order of operations to calculate the numbers in this section of the final project. So don't worry, you don't have to be good at math to learn JavaScript. This is just to show you how math works in JavaScript. In the rest of this lesson, we're going to learn some more details about numbers and math. The first detail we're going to learn is a weird behavior of math in JavaScript. First, we'll need to learn some terminology. In programming, whole numbers like 2, 3, and 4 are called integers. Decimal numbers like 2.2 and 2.5 are called floating point numbers, or floats. And unfortunately, computers have a problem working with floats. For example, if we go back to our console and type the calculation 0.1 plus 0.2 and press enter, it will give us this weird number here that's close to 0.3 but a little bit inaccurate. So this problem is not specific to JavaScript. Many programming languages also have this problem. The reason this happens is because of how computers store numbers. I'll give a simplified explanation. Computers can only store zeros and ones, while humans can count from 0 to 9. So there's sort of a mismatch between our number systems. For integers, this is not a problem. The computer can just use a bunch of zeros and ones to store it. However, for decimal numbers or floats, sometimes the computer can't store the number properly. For example, here's how the computer tries to store 0.2 using only zeros and ones. At the top is what the computer stores. At the bottom is what this is equal to in human numbers. We can see that the computer gets closer and closer to 0.2, but never actually reaches it. And this is why we get these inaccuracies when calculating with floats, because computers can't store some floats properly. Note that this doesn't happen with all floats. For example, computers can store 0.25 without any problems. So these inaccuracies only happen with some floats, but not all of them. However, when calculating money, we definitely want to avoid any inaccuracies. So let's learn how to do that. First, we're going to set up our cart again. So make sure in your cart you have one basketball with free shipping, and this time you have one t-shirt. So we're going to click Update, change this to 1, and click Save. And this t-shirt also has free shipping. Now let's scroll up, and we're going to calculate this number at the top again, which is the cost of the products. Let's go into our console, and we're going to add the cost of the basketball, $20.95, plus the cost of the t-shirt, which is $7.99. If we press enter, calculating with these floats causes the inaccuracies that we saw earlier. So how do we avoid this problem? The best practice when calculating money is to calculate in cents instead of dollars. So instead of $20.95, we're going to calculate 2,095 cents plus 7.99 cents. Notice we're not using floats anymore, so we avoid the inaccuracies. But now this number is in cents, so we need to convert back to dollars. To do that, we'll surround this calculation with brackets to make sure we calculate this first, and then at the end, we'll divide by 100 to convert back to dollars, because there are 100 cents in each dollar. If we press enter and scroll up, that's how we get the exact number that we see on the page. So remember, in programming, calculations with floats are sometimes inaccurate. And when working with money, the best practice is to do the calculation in cents and then convert back to dollars at the end. The next detail we're going to learn is how to round a number in JavaScript. Rounding just means taking a number and moving it to the nearest integer. To round a number, we can use this code. Capital M math dot round. Open bracket, close bracket. So make sure you use a capital M because JavaScript is case sensitive. Now between the brackets, we can put a number that we want to round, like 2.2. If we press enter, it will round this number down to 2. If we do capital M math dot round open bracket close bracket, and between the brackets we put 2.8 and press enter, it will round 2.8 up to 3. Now let's do a practical example with math.round. We're going to calculate the tax again, but this time we're going to round the result to exactly this number on the page. So first, let's calculate the tax. We'll go into our console and add the cost of the products in cents. So 2,095 cents for the basketball, and plus the cost of the t-shirt, which is 7.99 cents. And we'll surround this in brackets to make sure we calculate this first. And then we're going to multiply this by the tax percent, or 0.1. And finally, we'll convert this back to dollars. So let's surround this in brackets as well to make sure we calculate this first. And at the end, we'll divide by 100 to convert back to dollars. So notice here, we can have brackets inside brackets. In this situation, JavaScript will calculate the inner brackets first, and then the outer brackets, and then everything else. If we press enter, this gives us 2.894, which is close to the number on the page. It's the same amount of money, but our number is more accurate than we need. So now let's learn how to use math.round to round this number to exactly 2.89. First, let's create a copy of this calculation. So we'll select it, right-click, copy, and down here, right-click and paste. By the way, if you paste in the console, you might see this warning message. To fix this, you can type allow pasting and press enter. And now you can paste. So let's continue. And we were trying to round 2.894 to exactly 2.89. So one thing we might try to do is to round this entire calculation. However, this will round 2.894 to 3 because it rounds to the nearest integer. Instead, what we want to round is this number here. So remember that this number is the result in cents, which is 289.4 cents. If we round this number, it will round down to 289 cents, which is exactly $2.89. So to round this calculation, at the front, we'll type capital M math dot round. So we already have brackets around this, so we don't need extra brackets. So this will round to 289 cents. And finally, we'll convert this back to dollars at the end by dividing by 100. If we press enter, that's how we round this calculation to get the exact number on the page. So to summarize, we first calculate the result in cents, and then we round this to the nearest cent, and then at the end, we convert back to dollars. Again, don't worry, you don't have to be good at math to learn JavaScript. These examples are just for learning. Almost all the math we do in JavaScript is more simple than this. I'll give you some exercises at the end of this lesson to help you get more practice. The last thing we're going to learn in this lesson is how to use Google when you're learning to code. So far, I've been giving you different pieces of code, like alert and math.round. You might be wondering, where do I find this code? These pieces of code are features of JavaScript, and I find this code by searching on Google. So we're going to learn how to use Google to learn new features of JavaScript on our own. Let's go to our browser and create a new tab at the top. And we'll click here and type google.com and press enter. And we'll search in Google. So the trick to searching in Google is to search for what we are trying to do. For example, if we want to round a number, we would search for JavaScript how to round a number. If we press enter, sometimes you might get the code right away in the first result, and sometimes you might have to go into the other results to find the code that you need. In my example, I see the code math.round in the first result, so I can click into this result, read about what this code does, and also see some examples of how to use it. One thing to keep in mind is that when you're searching in Google, you might not understand all the code that you get in your results. For example, here, there's a lot of code that we haven't learned yet. And actually, that's okay. We just need to look for the pieces of code that look familiar to us, like this part of the code. We can then use this part of the code in our own code. We don't have to understand every bit of code that we get from Google. And don't worry, as we move through this course, we will understand more and more of this code that we get from Google results. These days, we also have some artificial intelligence, or AI tools, that can help us search for code. I'll provide links to some of these tools in the video description. By the way, to find the links mentioned in each lesson, you can click here in the description. And this page contains all the links mentioned in each lesson. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned how to work with numbers and math. We learned the order of operations and brackets. We calculated the numbers in the final Amazon project. We learned that calculations using floats can be inaccurate and how to avoid this problem when working with money. We learned how to round numbers using math.round, and we learned how to search for code on our own. Here are some exercises to help you practice numbers and math. In the previous lesson, we learned how to work with numbers and math. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to work with text, and we're going to create the text in this section of the final project. First, make sure you have the final project open and you're on the checkout page. Also make sure you have the console open on this page. If not, you can go to a blank area, right-click, click Inspect, and then click the console. Now, we're going to learn a feature of JavaScript called strings. A string represents text. Let's go to our console and create our first string. We're going to type single quote, hello, and single quote, and press enter. This is a string, and it represents the text hello. And we've actually seen this code before. In the first lesson, the first piece of code that we learned was alert, open bracket, single quote, hello, single quote, close bracket, and semicolon. This code creates a pop-up on the page. If we press enter, it creates a pop-up. Now inside these brackets, we actually created a string. This string is the text that appears in the pop-up. So as you can see, a string represents text. Let's press OK. And now let's learn the syntax rules for strings. To create a string, we just write some text like hello, and then surround this text with single quotes, one at the beginning and one at the end. We can also add strings together. For example, let's type the string sum plus the string text and press enter. When we add two strings, it combines the strings together into a bigger string. And this makes sense. We're adding two pieces of text together. We can also add more than two strings at a time. For example, we can type the string sum plus the string more plus the string text. If we press enter, the computer will combine all three strings into one big string. By the way, this is called concatenation when we combine strings together. Now, in the previous lesson, we learned about numbers. Numbers and strings are two different types of values in JavaScript. They represent different things. And we can actually check what type of value something is using this code. Type of, and then space, and then a value, like the number 2. If we press enter, type of will tell us that 2 is a number. If we do type of quote hello quote and press enter, it will tell us that hello is a string. Now, what if we added a string and a number together? For example, let's type the string hello plus the number 3 and press enter. So when we add a string and a number, JavaScript will automatically convert this number into a string. So this gets converted into the string hello plus the string 3. And then it combines them together into the string hello 3. This feature is called type coercion or automatic type conversion. Okay, now that we understand the basics of strings, let's do some practical examples. We're going to use strings and numbers to create the text in this section of the project. First, make sure that in your cart, you have one basketball with free shipping, and you have one t-shirt, also with free shipping, and you have no other products. Let's scroll up, and we'll start by creating this text in the top right. So this is the cost of the products, but this time we're going to have a $sign. So instead of just a number, this will be text. So one thing we can do to create this text is just type out the string directly, like quote $28.94 and quote. However, let's actually calculate this number using math. Remember, the advantage of JavaScript is that it's able to do calculations. So instead of typing out 28.94, we're just going to create the string $sign plus, and we're going to calculate this number using math. So we're going to add the cost of the basketball, which is $20.95, plus the cost of the t-shirt, which is $7.99. If we press enter, unfortunately, this doesn't look right. Instead of doing math and adding these two numbers together, it just sort of put the numbers one after another into the string. So why is this happening? JavaScript adds from left to right. So the first step is to add these two values. And as we learned, if we add a string and a number, JavaScript will automatically convert this number into a string. So the result of this calculation will be the string $20.95 and quote. The next step is to add 7.99. So it will add 7.99. And now we're adding again a string and a number. So JavaScript will automatically convert this number into a string and combine them together. That's why it puts 7.99 at the end of this string instead of doing math. So what we actually want to do here is to add these two numbers first and then combine the total with the string. So how do we do this? The solution is that strings also follow the order of operations, just like numbers. And remember, in the order of operations, we can use brackets to control which part of a calculation gets done first. So let's type this calculation out again. The string $ plus 20.95 plus 7.99. But this time, we're going to add an open bracket and a close bracket around this calculation. This tells the computer to calculate this number first using math, and then combine this result with the string after. If we press enter, now this is doing math, and it solves our original problem. Unfortunately, now we have another problem. This math is inaccurate. So remember from the previous lesson, doing calculations with floats can sometimes cause inaccuracies. And the best practice when calculating money is always calculate in cents and then convert back to dollars at the end. So at the bottom here, we're going to add the string $ plus open bracket, and instead of $20.95, we're going to add 2,095 cents plus 7.99 cents and close bracket. And then at the end, we're going to convert this number back to dollars by dividing by 100. If we press enter, this will give us the text that we see in the final project. Again, strings follow the same order of operations as numbers. Brackets are always calculated first, multiply and divide are done next, and add and subtract are done after. So adding this result to the string is the last step. Now let's do a more complicated example. Let's use strings and numbers to create this entire line of text, not just the dollar text. To create this, we're going to go from left to right. Let's go back in our console, and we're going to start with the string items, open bracket, and here we could just type 2 and close bracket, but let's actually calculate this number as well using math. So this number is the quantity, or the number of products in our cart. Let's go back to our console. We're going to end the string here, and we're going to add, and we're going to calculate the quantity. So we have 1 basketball plus 1 t-shirt. Again, we run into the same problem as before. This gets calculated first and results in a string, and then it will just combine the 1 at the end of the string instead of doing math. To solve this, we're going to use brackets again. So around the 1 plus 1, we're going to add open bracket and close bracket. This tells the computer to add the numbers first and then combine it with a string. All right, let's keep going from left to right. We're going to add the rest of the string, quote, close bracket, colon, and let's just use a space to represent the space between these two. So we'll type a space, $, and then we're going to calculate this number again and add it to the string. So we'll end the string and then plus, and we already did this calculation up here. So we can select this and then right click, copy, and here right click and paste and press enter. By the way, if you paste in the console, you might see this warning message. To fix this, you can type allow pasting and press enter. And now you can paste. And that's how we create this first line of text using strings and numbers. We break up the string into parts, calculate the numbers, and then add the parts back together. All right, now let's take these strings that we created and do something with them. Let's create a pop-up and display this first line of text inside the pop-up. We'll go back to our console and type the code for creating a pop-up, alert, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon, and then inside the pop-up, we're going to display this string. So let's just make a copy of this code. We'll select it, right click, copy, and between the brackets, right click and paste. If we press enter, the computer displays a pop-up with the first line of text of the final project inside. So that's how we use strings to create the text in the final project. And once we create the strings, we can use them in other JavaScript code. In the rest of this lesson, we're going to learn more details about strings. In JavaScript, there are actually 3 ways to create a string. The first way is to use single quotes, which we already learned. For example, we can type single quote, hello, and single quote, and press enter. The second way to create a string is to use double quotes. For example, double quote, hello, and double quote, and press enter. This creates the exact same string as single quotes. So which one should we use to create a string? Single quotes or double quotes? In JavaScript, I recommend using single quotes by default. They're a little easier to read and type. There is one situation where double quotes might be useful, and that is if we have a single quote inside the string. For example, if we type the string I'm learning JavaScript and single quote and press enter, this doesn't work because there's a single quote inside the string, and this single quote will end the string early. To solve this, we can create the string using double quotes. For example, double quote, I'm learning JavaScript, and double quote, and press enter. So now this works. Because we created the string using double quotes, the single quote no longer has a special meaning, and it will no longer end the string early. So this is a situation where double quotes might be useful. Otherwise, we use single quotes by default. Now, there's actually another solution to this problem, other than using double quotes, and that's by using an escape character. So a character is one letter, number, or symbol in a piece of text. For example, the text hello has 5 characters, H, E, L, L, O. A character can be a letter, a number, or also a symbol. These are all considered characters. Now, in addition to these characters, we have a special set of characters we can also use in a string called escape characters. An escape character looks like this: a backslash and then another character, like single quote. This combination actually counts as one character in a string. This character creates a single quote that is just text. It doesn't have a special meaning, and it doesn't start or end strings. For example, we can create this string with single quotes again. So single quote I, and this time we'll use the escape character backslash single quote, and then M learning JavaScript and single quote, and press enter. And now this works because the escape character backslash single quote creates a single quote that is just text. It doesn't start or end the string. Another escape character that's useful to know is backslash double quote. This creates a double quote that is just text. It doesn't start or end a string. The last escape character we'll learn in this lesson is backslash n. This is called the new line character. This escape character doesn't create the letter n anymore. It creates a new line of text. For example, let's create a pop-up using alert, open bracket, close bracket, and semicolon, and then inside the brackets, we're going to create a string sum, and then backslash n, text, and single quote. If we press enter, you'll notice that this escape character created a new line of text in the pop-up. And that's why we call this the new line character. So that's how escape characters work. They're a set of special characters that start with backslash, and we can use them in a string. Now let's press OK. And we're going to learn the third way of creating a string in JavaScript, which is using backticks. For example, let's type in our console, and we'll type backtick, hello, and backtick, and press enter. This creates the same string as single quotes and double quotes. Strings created with backticks actually have a name. We call these template strings, and they have a name because they have some special features. The first special feature of template strings is called interpolation. Interpolation lets us insert a value directly into a string. For example, let's say we want to create the first line of text in our project. Earlier in this lesson, we created this text with concatenation, which means we broke it up into parts and added them back together. Interpolation gives us a much easier way to do this. We'll go to our console, and we'll create this text using a template string, because interpolation is only a feature of template strings. So we'll type backtick items, open bracket, close bracket, and backtick. And now between these brackets, we want to insert the quantity, or the number of products in our cart. To insert this with interpolation, we're going to type $, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. So this combination of characters allows us to insert values directly into the string. Between these curly brackets, we can calculate the quantity, which is 1 basketball plus 1 t-shirt. This will add 1 plus 1, which equals 2, and then insert it directly into the string. Let's keep going and create the rest of this line. So we're going to type at the end a colon, space, and $, and now we're going to insert another value into the string, which is the cost of the products. To insert another value, we're going to type $, open curly bracket, close curly bracket again. And between the curly brackets, we're going to calculate the cost of the products, which is 2,095 cents plus 799 cents. And we'll surround this in brackets to make sure we calculate this first. And at the end, we're going to convert back to dollars by dividing by 100. If we press enter, this creates the first line of text again, in our final project. If we compare this code, which uses interpolation, to our previous code, which uses concatenation, you can see that interpolation is a much cleaner way of inserting values into a string. So interpolation is a recommended solution. Next, template strings have another special feature called multi-line strings. Let's go to our console, and we're going to type a backtick, sum, and then press enter, and text, and backtick. Notice that this string is on multiple lines, so we call this a multi-line string. And this feature is only available for template strings. If we press enter, you can see that the new line in the string just creates the new line escape character that we learned earlier. So that's the multi-line string feature of template strings. We're going to use multi-line strings a lot later in this course, but for now, I just wanted to introduce you to this feature. Now you might be wondering again, what should we use to create a string? Single quotes or template strings? Even though template strings have more features, I find that most JavaScript code still uses single quotes by default. So my personal recommendation is to use single quotes by default. And if we need to insert a value into the string or type the string on multiple lines, then use template strings. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned about strings. A string represents text. We learned how to use strings and numbers to create the text in our final project. We learned 3 different ways of creating a string: single quotes, double quotes, and backticks or template strings. We learned about escape characters, and we learned 2 useful features of template strings: interpolation and multi-line strings. Here's some exercises to help you practice working with strings. So far in this course, we've learned some basic features of JavaScript, like numbers and strings. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of this course, we use all 3 technologies to build a full website. HTML creates the content of a website, like the buttons and the text. CSS changes the appearance of the website, and JavaScript makes the website interactive. The first thing we're going to do is review the basics of HTML and CSS that we will need for the rest of this course. Now, in order to write HTML and CSS code, we'll need to install another piece of software called a code editor. A code editor helps us write and organize our code. The most popular code editor for web development is called VS Code, or Visual Studio Code. To install VS Code, you can go to google.com in your browser, search for VS Code, click the result, and follow the instructions to download and install. Once we've installed VS Code, we're ready to review the basics of HTML and CSS. We'll start with HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And just like JavaScript, HTML is also giving instructions to a computer. Now, unlike JavaScript, we can't use the console to write and run HTML code. Instead, we write HTML code inside a file using our code editor. Let's do that right now. We'll start by going to our desktop. So I'm going to close my browser to go to my desktop. And then we're going to create a new folder. So we can right-click, New Folder. This folder is going to contain all the code that we write in this course. Let's name this folder JavaScript-course. Next, we're going to open this folder in our code editor. So let's open VS Code. And then we'll click File, Open Folder, and find the folder that we just created. For me, it's on the desktop, and it's this folder right here. So we're going to select the folder, and then click Select Folder. Now we can close this startup message, and we're going to create an HTML file. We're going to click this icon to create a new file, and we're going to name this file website.html and press Enter. Ending the file name with .html tells the computer that this file contains HTML code rather than just text. Now let's review some basic HTML code. We're going to type the code less than, button, greater than. And we also need to type less than / button greater than, but our code editor might autocomplete this for us. So this code tells the computer to create a button. And inside the button, we're going to have the text, hello. Now let's save this file by clicking File, Save, or by typing Ctrl+S on Windows or Command+S on Mac. Now to run this HTML code, we're going to open this file in our browser. Let's go back to our desktop. We're going to open the folder that we created, find the HTML file, select it, and then right-click, Open with Google Chrome. As you can see, we have a website, and we created a button with the text hello inside. And if we look back at our code, that's exactly what we told the computer to do. So just like JavaScript, HTML is also giving instructions to a computer. Let's review some more HTML code. First, I'm just going to rearrange my windows here so that it's easy to see the website side by side. Next, we're going to click the end of the first line and press Enter to create a new line. And we're going to type the code less than p greater than. And we also need to type less than / p greater than. So this code creates a paragraph. And inside the paragraph, we're going to put some text. For example, paragraph of text. Now let's save our file by typing Ctrl+S on Windows or Command+S on Mac. And to update our website to the new code, we're going to go to our website and click Refresh, or type Ctrl+R on Windows or Command+R on Mac. And now you can see that the computer created a paragraph of text, just like we told it to do. And that's the basics of HTML. The computer reads our code and then follows our instructions one by one. First, it creates a button, and then it creates a paragraph of text. Now let's review the syntax rules for HTML. Each of these things that we're displaying on a web page, these are called HTML elements. So a button is a type of HTML element, and a paragraph is another type of HTML element. To create an element, we start with a less than symbol, and then the element name, like a button, and then the greater than symbol. So this whole thing is called an HTML tag. This tells a computer to create a button element. Every HTML tag needs a matching tag. The matching tag follows the same syntax, except it has a slash in front of the element name. So this is called the opening tag, and this is called the closing tag. You can think of the opening tag as the start of the button, and the closing tag as the end of the button. And in between, we have the contents inside the button. In this case, it's the text hello. In addition to text, we can also have elements inside an element. For example, we can go to our paragraph element and we can add a button inside. So less than, button, greater than, and we also need less than / button greater than. And then inside the button, we'll also have the text hello. If we save this file and refresh the page, now our paragraph element has a button element inside. By the way, this is called nesting, when we have an element inside another element. The last syntax rule we have to review is that in HTML, if we have multiple spaces, for example, if we go here and type multiple spaces are combined into one space on the web page. So if we save this code and refresh, you'll notice that all of the spaces that we added only show up as one space on the web page. In addition, in HTML, new lines also count as spaces. So if we go back to our code and we type here and press enter to create a new line, and then save and refresh, notice that the new line doesn't appear on the web page. And that's because this new line here is the same as spaces in HTML. So all of these get combined into one space on the web page. At first, this might seem a little weird, but this feature gives us a lot of flexibility when organizing our HTML code. For example, we can go into our code and add a new line here to separate these two elements and make our code easier to read. Another thing we usually do to make our code easier to read is to put the contents of an element on its own line. For example, we're going to type here and press enter, and here and press enter again to put the contents of the button on its own line. Now it's a lot easier to see where this button starts and where it ends. We can do the same thing with the paragraph. We can type here and press enter, and type here as well and press enter, and then remove some of the extra spaces to put the content of the paragraph on its own line. And now if we save our file and refresh, you'll notice that none of the new lines that we added appear on the web page. By the way, a web page is a single page, like the home page or the cart page. Together, we call this a website. So that's the basics of HTML and HTML syntax. Now let's review CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and CSS changes the appearance of our website. Let's review some CSS code. We're going to write our CSS code inside our HTML file. First, let's type here and create some new lines at the top. And then at the top, we're going to create a special HTML element called the style element. So let's type less than, style, greater than. And we also need the closing tag less than / style greater than. So the style element is unique because it doesn't appear visibly on the page. Instead, the purpose of the style element is that it lets us write CSS code inside. So inside here, let's press enter to create a new line, and we're going to type button, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And then inside the curly brackets, we're also going to press enter to create a new line. So this is CSS code, and this code tells the computer to change the appearance of all buttons on the page. And then inside these curly brackets, we can tell the computer how to change the appearance. For example, we can type background -color : red and semicolon. If we save and refresh, you can see that this CSS code changes the appearance of all buttons on the page and changes their background color to red. Let's do another example. We're going to go back to our CSS code. I'm going to type here and press enter to create a new line. And we're going to add color :white and semicolon. Let's save and refresh. And this CSS code changes the text color of all buttons on the page to white. Let's do one more example. We're going to type the code border: none and semicolon. Let's save this and refresh. And this CSS code removes the border for all buttons on the page. And that's how CSS works. We tell the computer which elements we want to change, and then how to change the appearance of these elements. Now let's review the syntax rules for CSS. This part of the CSS code is called the CSS selector. It tells the computer which elements we want to change. In other words, it selects which elements to change. Inside the curly brackets, we have some CSS styles. This tells the computer how to change the appearance. For each style, the left side is called the CSS property. This tells the computer what we're changing. The right side is called the CSS value. This tells the computer what we're changing the property to. For example, this style changes the background color to red. We use a colon to separate the property and the value, and a semicolon at the end to tell the computer that this is the end of a style. So that's the basic syntax of CSS. We tell the computer which elements we want to change, and then how to change the appearance of these elements. The next thing we're going to review is HTML attributes. Right now, this CSS selector changes the appearance of all buttons on the page. However, what if we only want to change the appearance of this one button, and we want to style the other button differently? How do we do that? We're going to review a feature of HTML called attributes. Attributes change the behavior of an element. For example, we're going to go to the opening tag of the first button, and then here we're going to add an HTML attribute by typing space title equals double quotes. And then in between the double quotes, we're going to type tooltip. So this is an HTML attribute, and this attribute adds a tooltip to this button. If you're wondering what a tooltip is, if we hover over some code in our code editor, it'll show us this sort of pop-up with more information. This is called a tooltip when we hover over something and this shows up. So if we save our file and refresh the web page, and now we hover over our button, we can see that the HTML attribute added a tooltip to our button. And then inside the double quotes is the text inside the tooltip. For example, we can actually change this to good job. And if we save and refresh and hover over our button, the text between the double quotes is what shows up in our tooltip. So that's an example of an HTML attribute. Now let's review the syntax rules for attributes. We always put attributes on the opening tag, and we add a space between the element name and the attribute to separate them. On the left side is the attribute name. This tells the computer what we're changing about this element. On the right side is the attribute value. This tells the computer what we're changing this attribute to. For example, here we're changing the tooltip of this element to good job. We separate the name and value with an equal sign and make sure there are no spaces around the equal sign. and we surround the value with double quotes. Now let's go back to the original problem. How do we style these buttons differently? We can do this using a very important attribute called the class attribute. Let's review that right now. We're going to go back to our button, and then here, we're going to type space class equals double quotes. And then inside the double quotes, we're going to type red dash button. So the class attribute sort of adds a label to an element. So here, we labeled this button as a red button. And now that we labeled this element, we can select it in CSS. To do that, we're going to go to our CSS code. We're going to remove the button selector and replace it with .red dash button. When we start the selector with a dot, this means that now we're looking for a class. So here, we're going to look for all elements with the class red dash button, which is only this element. If we save and refresh, now only the elements with the class red button gets these styles. We can also add the same class to multiple elements. For example, we can go to our other button and add the class equals red dash button. If we save and refresh, now these styles get applied to both buttons again, because they both have the class red dash button. If we want to style this button differently, we just give it a different class. For example, we can change this to yellow dash button. And then in our CSS, we can add another selector. So we can type dot. This means we're going to select a class, and we're going to select the yellow dash button class. Open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And then inside here, we can add some styles for the yellow button. For example, background dash color colon yellow and semicolon. Now let's save and refresh. And that's how we use the class attribute in HTML to modify specific elements. The final thing we need to review is something called the HTML structure. Let's go back to our website. We're going to find a blank area and then right-click and then click Inspect. So we already learned about the Console tab. Here we can write and run JavaScript code. Now we're going to go to the Elements tab, which is for HTML and CSS. So in the Elements tab, we can see all the HTML on the page, as well as all the CSS on the page. And we can play around with the CSS if we want. Now if we go back to the HTML, you'll notice that our web page has some elements that we didn't add before. The HTML element, the head element, and the body element. So this is the structure that we're supposed to follow when writing HTML. In our code, we didn't follow this structure, so the browser actually adds it for us automatically. However, it's still best practice to follow this structure in our code, because it gives us access to some more features of HTML. Let's review the HTML structure and add it to our code. We're going to type up here, and we're going to create some new lines. And now, every HTML file is going to start with less than, exclamation, doc type in capitals, and then space, HTML, and greater than. This is not an HTML element. It's a special line of code that tells the browser to use a modern version of HTML. If we don't have this, the browser might fall back to an older version of HTML that has less features. Next, we're going to create an HTML element. So less than, HTML, and greater than. The HTML element represents the entire web page. So everything on the web page should go inside this element. And then inside the HTML element, we're also going to split it up into two sections: the head element and the body element. So the body element is supposed to contain everything that is visible on the page. In our example, that would be the buttons and the paragraph. So let's actually select this code, and we're going to right click and cut, and then inside the body, we're going to right click and paste. The head element contains information about the page. In general, everything that is not visible on the page goes inside the head. In our example, that would be the style element. So let's select this as well. We're going to right click and cut, and then inside the head, we're going to right click and paste. And at the bottom, let's just clean up by removing all of the extra new lines. So this is a structure that we're supposed to follow in all of our HTML files. As you can see, this structure uses a lot of nesting, or elements inside elements, to organize our code. Okay, so what are the benefits of following this structure? One benefit is that there are other elements that we can use inside the head. For example, let's type here, press enter, and we're going to add the title element. So the title element sets the text in the tabs. Inside, we can type HTML CSS review. If we save and refresh, the title will show up in the tab. So this is an example of an element that we can now add in the head. Another benefit that we get from this structure is the ability to automatically refresh our web page when we change our code. So far, every time we change our code, we have to save and then manually refresh the web page. We can actually automate this by following the structure and then installing a VS Code extension. So let's click the extension area, and we're going to search for the extension Live Server and click install. Once we have that installed, we're going to change a setting. Let's open the settings by clicking this icon in the bottom left and then click Settings. At the top, we're going to search for Live Server. And we're going to look for a setting called Live Server Custom Browser. And we're going to change this to Chrome. Now, if Google Chrome is already your default web browser, you don't need to do this step, but it's nice to know. Now let's close the settings and go back to our code. Next, instead of opening this file directly in the browser like before, we're going to use Live Server to open this file. To do that, we're going to right-click this file in our code editor and then click Open with Live Server. If we open a file with Live Server, this web page will automatically refresh when we change our code. For example, we can go here and change the background color to green. If we save, Live Server will automatically refresh the web page, so we don't have to do that back and forth anymore. Let's just change it back to red so that the class name makes sense, and save. And we can also close the previous tab. So this is the HTML structure. It gives us access to more features of HTML. And this is all we need to review about HTML and CSS for now. If you want to learn more, you can check out my HTML and CSS full course in the video description. By the way, to find the links mentioned in each lesson, you can click here in the description. And this page contains all the links mentioned in each lesson. Before we add JavaScript to our website, we're going to review some VS Code setup. So you notice that many of these lines have spaces at the front. These spaces are called indents, and indents make our code easier to read. For example, we can easily tell that this code is inside the brackets because it has an extra indent in the front. If we didn't have indents, here's what the code would look like. It's a lot harder to read. To add an indent, we can type at the beginning of the line and press Tab. To remove an indent, we can press Shift Tab or just use backspace. Now, by default, VS Code uses 4 spaces per indent. However, in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we usually use 2 spaces per indent. So we're going to update this setting. Let's go to our settings by clicking this icon in the bottom left, and then click Settings. And at the top, we're going to search for Tab. And we're going to change the tab size from 4 to 2. Now let's close the settings. And we're also going to change the indents for this file. We're going to go down here and click Select Indent. And we're going to choose Indent using spaces, and then click 2. And now if we type at the start of a line and press Tab, it will only add 2 spaces per indent. So let's reformat our code to use 2 spaces per indent instead of 4. First, we're going to remove all the indents in our code. A shortcut for this is to select all of these lines and press Shift Tab to remove 1 indent for each line. So we're going to keep pressing Shift Tab until we remove all the indents. Next, we're going to add the indents back using a similar shortcut. We're going to select the head element and press Tab to add 1 indent for each line, and then select everything inside the head and press Tab to add another indent, and then select everything inside style and press Tab, and then inside each of these brackets, we're going to select the lines, press Tab, and then here, press Tab. We'll do the same thing for the body element. We'll select all these lines and press Tab. We'll select everything inside the body, press Tab, and then inside each of these elements, we're going to press Tab and press Tab. Now, if we save, our website will look the same because all we did was adjust the indents. So there's one other setting in VS Code that we're going to set up, which is line wrapping. If you look at this line of code, you can see that it's really long, and we need to scroll horizontally to see the rest of the line. Instead, we're going to make this line wrap around if it gets too long. Let's go back into our settings by clicking here, and then click the settings. And then up here, we're going to search for wrap. And we're going to look for editor word wrap. And we're going to turn this on. Now, if we close our settings and go back to our code, this line, which is really long, will wrap around to the next line instead of us having to horizontally scroll. So that's the VS Code setup that we need. 2 spaces per indent and line wrapping. Finally, we're going to add JavaScript to this website. So we learned that we can use the console to write and run JavaScript. Well, there's actually another way to run JavaScript, which is inside an HTML file. Let's learn how to do that. So we learned that HTML has a special element that runs CSS code called the style element. Well, HTML has another special element that runs JavaScript code, and this element is called the script element. So inside our body, at the bottom of the body, we're going to add less than script greater than and the closing tag less than / script greater than. And inside the script element, we can put some JavaScript code. We're going to add the code alert, open bracket, quote, hello, quote, close bracket, and semicolon. If we save, Live Server will refresh the page, and now you'll notice that the computer now runs our JavaScript code, just like it did in the console. It creates a pop-up with the text hello inside. And we usually put the script element at the bottom of the body because we want the web page to be created first, and then we use JavaScript to make it interactive. For the rest of this course, we're going to run our JavaScript code using an HTML file. The console that we used in the previous lessons is more of a way to try out JavaScript code. We wouldn't use a console for a real website. In addition to the script element, we have another way to run JavaScript code inside HTML, and that's by using an attribute. Let's go back to our first button, and here we're going to add another attribute. So let's type space, and this time we're going to add the onClick attribute equals double quotes. So this attribute will run JavaScript code whenever we click this button. That's what onClick means. Between the double quotes, we can write some JavaScript. For example, let's press enter, enter, and then here we're going to type alert, open bracket, quote, good job, quote, close bracket, and semicolon. Now if we save, Live Server will refresh the page and run this line of JavaScript code. Let's press OK. And now if we click this button, it will run this line of JavaScript code and create a pop-up with the text, good job inside. So those are two places where we can run JavaScript code, the script element and the onClick attribute. The code in the script element runs first when the page is loaded. The code in the onClick attribute runs after when we click the button on the page. And that's how we use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together on a website. Notice that everything starts from HTML. HTML first creates the website, and then inside the HTML, we can run CSS code to change the appearance, and we can run JavaScript code to make the website interactive. Now let's learn some new features of JavaScript that we haven't seen yet in this course. The next feature we're going to learn is called comments. Comments are pieces of code that the computer ignores. So let's create our first comment. We're going to go down to the script element here and type //. So this is a comment. Anything after the double slash will be ignored by the computer. So we can type anything we want, like this is a comment. If we save, it ignores this line and creates the pop-up in the next line. Now let's close this pop-up and learn why we use comments. Comments are useful for providing more information for people reading our code. For example, we can create a comment above this code, like this code creates a pop-up. This comment helps others and ourselves understand what this code does. So that's one way we use comments. Another way we use comments is if we don't want to run some code anymore, but we also don't want to delete it. For example, this code creates a pop-up every time we refresh the page. And this can be annoying. So I want to stop running this code, but I also don't want to delete it, because you might want to review this code later. So what we can do here is to add a double slash in front of this line to turn this code into a comment. Now, if we save, the computer will ignore this line of code and not create the pop-up. This is called commenting out the code. It's useful if we don't want to run some code anymore, but we also don't want to delete it for informational purposes. So JavaScript has another syntax for writing comments, and that syntax is /* and */. Here, anything between the stars is a comment. This is called a multi-line comment, because between the stars, we can write a comment on multiple lines. For example, we can type multi, enter, line, enter, comment. On the other hand, double slash is known as a single line comment. Now, just like JavaScript, HTML and CSS also have comments, but they use a different syntax. If we scroll up to our HTML, here we can type <! dash dash. And we also need dash dash greater than. So anything between these double dashes is a comment. For example, this is a comment. In CSS, to create a comment, we can type /***. So it's the same multi-line comment as JavaScript. Between the stars, we can add a comment. So this is a comment. If we save our file, nothing changes on our web page because comments are ignored by the computer. The last feature of JavaScript we're going to learn is called console.log. Let's go back to our code. And at the bottom, in the script element, we're going to type the code 2 + 2. So we learned that this code in JavaScript does some math. However, if we save this file, where is the result of this math? So we might think that the result will show up in the console, but if we right-click, click Inspect, and then click the console, you'll notice that the result doesn't show up here either. And that's because before we were running 2 + 2 inside the console. So the result shows up in the console. But now we're not running this code in the console anymore. We're running this code on the web page. So how do we see this result? The solution is we're going to redirect this result back to the console. To do that, we're going to use this piece of code. Console.log, open bracket, close bracket, and semicolon. Console.log will display whatever's between the brackets back in the console. So if we move this code between the brackets, so we select this, and then right-click, cut, and then between the brackets, right-click, paste, and save, the result of this code is displayed back in the console. And console.log works for any code that we learned so far. For example, we can use strings. So let's create a new line and type console.log, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon, and then between the brackets, let's type some strings. Quote, some, quote, plus, quote, text, quote, and save this file. Again, it will display the result of whatever's between the brackets back in the console. So that's how we see the result of JavaScript code that is running in a file. We use console.log. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we reviewed the basics of HTML and CSS. We set up our code editor VS Code. We learned how to load JavaScript inside an HTML file using the script element and the onClick attribute. We learned how to create comments, and we learned how to use console.log. Thanks for watching this course so far. If you want to support this channel, you can check out the premium version of my courses just like this one, where you can get a certificate of completion and a better learning platform. If you're interested in extra videos from me, more in-depth videos, and behind-the-scenes content, you can check out these links here. You can also support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and sharing this video with others. Thanks again, and let's continue with the course. Here are some exercises you can try on your own to practice what we learned in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn the next feature of JavaScript called variables. And we're going to use variables to build a simple version of the cart quantity feature of the final project. First, let's create a new HTML file just for learning variables. We're going to go to our code editor and click this icon to show our files, and then click this icon to create a new file. And we're going to name this file 05-variables.html and press enter. So the 05 just means that this file is for lesson 5. Let's also add the lesson number to website.html. We'll select this file and then right-click, rename, and then at the front, we'll add 04- and press enter. Next, we're going to copy all the code in website.html to variables.html. So let's click in this file, and we're going to select all of this code by typing Ctrl-A on Windows or Command-A on Mac. And then we're going to right-click, copy, and then inside variables.html, right-click, and paste. Let's click this icon to hide our files for now, and we'll prepare this file for this lesson. So let's scroll up to the top, and first we're going to change the title to variables. Next, we're going to delete all the CSS because we're going to start over. And we're going to delete all the HTML except for the script element. And let's delete all the JavaScript from the previous lesson. And finally, let's save. And we'll open this file in our browser by right-clicking and then open with Live Server. And now we can close the previous tab and the previous code for now. Now we're ready to learn variables. First of all, what is a variable? A variable is like a container. We can save a value, like a number or a string, inside a variable, and then use it later. Let's do an example and create our first variable. Inside the script element, we're going to type the code let and space. The word let creates a new variable. And now we're going to choose a name for our new variable. Let's name this variable1. So this creates a variable or a container named variable1. And now we can save a value inside this variable. To do that, we're going to type space equals space, and then a value, like a number or a string. So let's save the number 3 inside. And we'll type a semicolon at the end. So here, we used the let to create a new variable. We named this variable variable1, and we saved the value 3 inside this variable. Now that we saved this value, we can use it later. For example, let's type a new line and type the code console.log, open bracket, close bracket, and semicolon. Remember from the previous lesson that this code displays whatever's inside the brackets in the console. So far, we put a value inside, like the number 2. If we save, and then go to our website and open the console, so right-click, inspect, and then click the console, we can see that the number 2 was displayed in the console. So now let's try replacing this value with the variable that we created above. So instead of 2, we're going to console.log variable1. If we save, notice that it now displays 3. So it's displaying whatever value is saved inside the variable. As you can see, we can save a value inside a variable and then use that variable later on. Let's do another example. We're going to create another variable. So we're going to create some new lines and we'll type let. And this time, let's name this variable calculation. And we're going to type space equals space to save a value inside this new variable. And this time, instead of just a number, we're going to save a calculation. 2 plus 2 and semicolon. So this will calculate 2 plus 2 and then save the result, which is 4, into the variable. If we console.log, open bracket, calculation, and semicolon, and save, it will show us that the value 4 is saved inside calculation. Now let's try this code. We're going to type a new line and then console.log, open bracket, and calculation again, and plus 2 and semicolon. So here we're using a variable inside a calculation. What this does is that it takes whatever value is saved inside the variable. Right now it is 4, and then substitutes that value into the calculation. So this will be 4 plus 2, which equals 6. If we save, we can see that in the console, it displayed 6. So we can use a variable wherever we use a value. And JavaScript will substitute whatever is inside the variable into the code. Let's do another example. We're going to type some new lines and create a new variable again using let, and we're going to name this variable result. And we're going to make it equal to calculation plus 2 and semicolon. So this does the same thing as the code before. It will take whatever value is inside calculation, which is 4, and substitute it into this code. So we get 4 plus 2 equals 6. But this time, we have an extra step. We're going to save this result, which is 6, into another variable. So if we console.log result and save, we can see that 6 was saved into the result variable. Again, we can use a variable wherever we use a value. Now, in addition to numbers, we can save any type of value in a variable, including strings. For example, let's create a new variable using let, and let's name this message. And we're going to save inside this variable a string this time. So quote, hello, quote, and semicolon. Again, we're going to console.log this variable. So console.log and message, and a semicolon at the end. If we save, it will show us that the string hello is saved inside this variable. Okay, now that we learned how variables work, let's learn the syntax rules for variables. The word let creates a new variable, and then we give the variable a name. So we can name variables almost anything we want, except for a few restrictions. Number one, we can't use special words like let as a variable name. That's because let already has a special meaning in JavaScript. It creates a variable. So let is a reserved word. However, we can use let1 or let2 as variable names. We just can't use let. Number two, we can't start a variable name with a number. If we start with a number, JavaScript will think this is a number instead of a variable name. However, we can use numbers in the middle or the end. Lastly, we can't use most special characters, like these or a space in a variable name. However, there are two special characters we can use, $ and underscore. So those are the rules for naming variables. And then to save something inside a variable, we just use the equal sign, and then the value we want to save. And that's it. After we create a variable, we can start using it in the rest of our code. Now there's one last part of the syntax that we haven't learned, which is the semicolon. We've seen semicolons in many places already. In JavaScript, a semicolon means this is the end of an instruction. It's similar to a period in English. In English, a period means this is the end of a sentence. So here, this semicolon tells JavaScript that this is the end of an instruction. And now after this, we can add another instruction, like console.log, open bracket, and then the string semicolon, and a semicolon at the end. If we save, it will run these two instructions one after another without any problems. So if we didn't have the semicolon here, and we save, it wouldn't work because JavaScript thinks that this entire line is one instruction. So we need semicolons to separate different instructions in JavaScript. If we save, everything goes back to normal. So JavaScript is a little special because it has a feature called semicolon insertion. That means it will try to insert the last semicolon in a line of code automatically. For example, if we removed the last semicolon and save, this code will work without that semicolon. And that's because JavaScript inserts the last semicolon automatically. However, a lot of companies still prefer to use semicolons in their JavaScript code because semicolon insertion can sometimes put the semicolon in the wrong place. For this reason, we're also going to use semicolons in this course to help you get used to JavaScript code with semicolons. Next, we're going to learn how to change the value that is saved inside a variable. For example, here we save the number 3 inside variable 1. Now we're going to change the value saved inside variable 1. To do that, we're going to go to the bottom and create some new lines. And we're going to type the variable name again. So variable 1. And now to change the value saved inside, we're just going to type the equal sign and then a different value like 5 and semicolon. And now if we console.log this variable, console.log variable 1 and semicolon and save, it will show us that 5 is now saved inside variable 1. Notice also that if we scroll up to the top, the first console.log still displays the value 3. And that's because at this point in the code, variable 1 still contained 3. We didn't update the variable yet. So when we first saved a value inside this variable, this is called assigning a value to a variable. Then when we change the value inside this variable, this is called reassigning a value to a variable. Now let's learn the syntax rules for reassigning a value. Notice that we don't use the word let when reassigning. That's because let creates a new variable. So if we try to use let again, it would try to create a new variable named variable1. However, variable1 already exists, and we can't create two variables with the same name, so this would cause an error. Instead, to reassign a variable, we just type out the variable name and make it equal to something else. So that's the syntax for reassigning a variable. Now we're going to do one last example before working on the project. Let's go to the end of our code. We're going to type some new lines. And this time, we're going to reassign variable1 again. So we can reassign a variable as many times as we want. So let's type variable1 and then equals, and we're going to type variable1 plus 1 and semicolon. So we learned earlier that we can use a variable inside a calculation, and it will substitute whatever value is inside the variable. Here, we're also using a variable inside the calculation, but we're using this variable itself. So it's essentially taking this variable, increasing it by 1, and then saving it back. If we console.log this variable, variable1, and save, variable1 now contains 6. So it took the previous value in variable1, which was 5, added 1, and then saved it back. So this is how we increase the value of a variable by a certain number. Okay, now that we know how to create and reassign variables, we're ready to work on a project. So I actually prepared a project that we can do for this lesson. And we can see this project by going to our browser, clicking at the top, and typing supersimple.dev/projects/variables and press enter. So we're going to work on the cart quantity feature of the final project. So in the final project, we have a number in the top right corner that shows how many products are in our cart. When we click the Add to Cart button, this quantity will increase. So what you see here is a simple version of the cart quantity feature that we can create right now. Let's go over how it works. First, make sure you have the console open on this page. Now when we click the Show Quantity button, it will show us that there are 0 products in our cart. If we click the Add to Cart button, it will increase the quantity by 1 and display it in the console. If we click Add to Cart again, it will increase the quantity by 1 again. Now in the final project, we can also add more than one product at a time using this dropdown. For now, we're going to build a simpler version of that. We're going to use the +2 and +3 buttons to add multiple products. So when we click the +2 button, it will increase the quantity by 2 and display it in the console. And when we click the +3 button, it will increase the quantity by 3. And finally, when we click the Reset Cart button, it will reset the quantity back to 0 and display this message in the console. So now that we understand how this project works, let's build this step by step. First, let's create a new HTML file just for this project. We're going to go to our code editor and click this icon to show our files, and then click this icon to create a new file. Let's name this file 05-cart-quantity.js. variables.html and press enter. Next, let's open variables.html, and we're going to copy all the code here into our new file. Let's type Control A on Windows or Command A on Mac to select all this code, and then right-click, copy, and then in our new file, right-click and paste. Let's close this for now. And in the new file, we're going to change the title to cart quantity. And let's remove all of our JavaScript code, but keep the script element because we're going to write new JavaScript code. Now we're ready to begin. Let's start by creating these buttons. Let's go to the body element. I'm going to create a new line. And here, as we learned in the previous lesson, we can create a button using this HTML code, less than, button, greater than, and the closing tag less than / button greater than. Inside this button, we're going to have the text show quantity. And let's save. Now let's open this file in Live Server by right-clicking and then open with Live Server. And we can see that we created the first button. Now let's create the other buttons here. Feel free to pause the video if you want to try it yourself. We're going to go back to our HTML and create another button. Inside this one, we're going to have the text add to cart. Let's create another button. This one is going to have the text +2, and we'll create another button. This one is going to be +3, and finally, we'll create the last button. And this one is reset cart. And now let's save. And if we go back to our tab, we've created all the buttons. Now let's make this web page interactive with JavaScript. First of all, we need somewhere to save the cart quantity. So as we learned in this lesson, variables are the perfect solution for this. Variables let us save a value. So let's go into the script element, and we're going to create a variable by typing let. And this variable is going to save the cart quantity. So let's just name it cart Q quantity. So the cart quantity will start out at 0. So we're going to type equals 0 and semicolon. Next, when we click the show quantity button, we want to display the quantity in the console. To do this, we learned a special HTML attribute in the previous lesson called the onClick attribute. So we're going to type in this opening tag here, space onClick equals and double quotes. So the onClick attribute runs some JavaScript when we click this button. And between the double quotes, we can write JavaScript code. So let's press enter, enter. And now when we click this button, we want to display the cart quantity in the console. So let's type console.log, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon. And then between the brackets, we're going to display a message. Now, if we go back to supersimple.dev and we click show quantity, we want to display this message in the console. So in our code, between the brackets, we're going to type the string quote cart quantity : 0. Now let's save and go back to our tab to try it out. So we're going to open the console first by right-clicking and then click Inspect and then click the console. And now when we press the Show Quantity button, it should display that message in the console. Okay, So we just made our project interactive. However, we obviously don't want to display 0 every time. We want to display the value inside cart quantity. So we'll need to insert this value inside this string. Remember from the strings lesson, when we want to insert a value into a string, we're going to use a template string. So let's switch the single quotes to backticks to create a template string. And now instead of 0, we're going to insert a value using $, open curly bracket, and close curly bracket. And in between these brackets, we're going to insert this variable, cart capital Q quantity. Remember that JavaScript is case sensitive, so make sure you type the variable name exactly the same. Now let's save and click show quantity again. And now it displays the value inside cart quantity in the console. So notice that variables also work with string interpolation. Again, we can use a variable wherever we use a value, and it will just substitute whatever value is saved inside this variable into the code. Now let's make the rest of the buttons interactive. So when we click the Add to Cart button, we're going to add 1 to this cart quantity and display it in the console. So again, we're going to type here and type space on click equals double quotes, and between the double quotes, we're going to add JavaScript. Let's also add some new lines here to make our code easier to read. Okay, so in the onClick attribute, we're going to do 2 things. The first one is increase the cart quantity by 1. We can do that by reassigning the cart quantity variable. So we're going to type just the variable name, cart quantity, and we're going to make it equal to itself plus 1 and semicolon. Next, we're going to display the updated quantity in the console. So let's press enter, and we're going to display this message again. So we can actually just copy this code. So we'll select it and then right click and copy. And then here, right click and paste. Now if we save and click the Add to Cart button, we'll see that it increased the quantity by 1 and displayed the updated quantity in the console. Let's press it again to make sure it works. So it increases it by 1 again and then displays it in the console. So that's basically how the cart quantity feature works in the final project. First, we need a variable to save the quantity, and then when we click a button, we're going to update the quantity. So now let's make the rest of these buttons interactive. Feel free to pause the video if you want to try it yourself. For the +2 button, we're going to add the onClick attribute again. OnClick equals double quotes. And inside, we're going to increase the cart quantity by 2. So cart quantity, and then we'll just make it equal to itself plus 2 and semicolon. And again, we're going to display the updated quantity in the console. So we can create a new line and just copy this code. So select it, right click, copy, and here, right click and paste. Let's save and click +2 a few times. And we can see that it adds 2 to the cart quantity and displays it in the console. For the +3 button, we'll do the same. Let's type an onClick attribute. Click equals double quotes. And here, we're going to increase the cart quantity by 3. So cart quantity equals itself plus 3 and semicolon. And we're going to display this in the console again. So we'll select this, right click, copy, and here, right click and paste. Let's save again and try it out to make sure it works. So +3, +3. And finally, let's do the reset cart button. So we'll add the onClick attribute again. onClick equals double quotes. And inside the double quotes, we're going to do something a little different this time. Instead of increasing the cart quantity, we'll set it back to 0. To do this, we can just reassign the cart quantity variable. So cart quantity, and just make it equal to 0 and a semicolon. Now, if we go back to supersimple.dev and try out this reset cart button, you'll notice that it displays two messages. The first message is cart was reset. So we're going to display that message in our code first. Console.log and the string cart was reset. And the second message is the same message as the other buttons. So we can just select this and then right click, copy, and then here, right click and paste. And now let's save and go back to our tab and give this a try. So the cart quantity starts at 0. We press add to cart, increases by 1. This increases by 2. This increases by 3. And when we click reset cart, it'll display cart was reset and reset the cart quantity back to 0. And that's it. We just created a simple version of the cart quantity feature of our final project, using everything that we learned in this course so far. Now we're going to learn some shortcuts for reassigning variables. So if we look at this line of code, here, we're increasing the value of this variable by 2, and then saving it back. Well, there's actually a shortcut for this, and that shortcut is cart quantity plus equals 2 and semicolon. So this does the same thing as the line above, but it's just shorter. The plus means we're going to add 2 to cart quantity, and equals means we're going to save that result back to cart quantity. So we can actually delete this line, and the code will work the same way. If we save and try it out, it will still add a 2 and then save it back in cart quantity. Let's scroll up and practice by using this shortcut for cart quantity plus 1. So instead of this line, we can type cart quantity plus equals 1 and semicolon. So it turns out that in programming, plus equals 1 is so common that we have an even shorter shortcut for plus equals 1. And that shortcut is cart quantity plus plus and a semicolon. So this is the same thing as plus equals 1. And all three lines do the same thing. So we can remove these lines, and the code will work the same because it's just a shortcut. If we save, so if we click add to cart, it will add 1 every time. So those are some shortcuts for reassigning variables. We also have these shortcuts for the other operators, like minus equals, multiply equals, divide equals, and minus minus. I'll leave some exercises for these other shortcuts at the end of this lesson. Next, we're going to learn some best practices for naming variables. So if we scroll down, notice that our variable cart quantity has 2 words in it, cart and quantity. We learned earlier that we can't have spaces in a variable name. So if we want to have multiple words, we have to combine them together, like this. Now you might be wondering why we wrote it this way, with a lowercase c and a capital Q. This is actually a naming convention called camel case. In camel case, we combine the words together and capitalize every word except the first word. So for cart quantity, we capitalize quantity, but we keep cart lowercase because it's the first word. Camel case is actually the standard naming convention for JavaScript. All of our variable names should use camel case. Now in programming, there are other naming conventions that exist. Another one is called Pascal case. Pascal case is the same as camel case, except we capitalize the first word. So for cart quantity, Pascal case would be capital cart and capital quantity. In JavaScript, there is one feature where we use Pascal case, which we'll learn later in this course. For everything else, we use camel case. Another naming convention is kebab case. Here, we keep the words lowercase and combine them with a dash, like cart-quantity. Kebab case doesn't work in JavaScript because the dash is already a minus symbol. However, we use kebab case in HTML and CSS, and also in our file names, as you can see here. And finally, we have snake case, where we keep the words lowercase and combine them with underscores. Snake case is used in other languages, but it's not really used in JavaScript. So those are the common naming conventions that we use in programming. Now, one more thing I want to note is that when we name our variables, try to pick a name that is not too short or too long. For example, instead of cart quantity, we could have named this variable C. But this name is too short. It's hard to understand what C means. We could also use a name like this: quantity of products in the cart. But this name is too long. It's hard to read this in the code. So try to have a balance between a name that is understandable but not too long, like cart quantity. The last thing we're going to learn in this lesson is there are 3 ways to create variables in JavaScript. Let's go back to our variables.html file, and we're going to learn those 3 ways. So the first way is to use let, which we already learned. The second way to create a variable is to use the word const. So at the bottom, we can type const space and then a variable name, like variable2, and make it equal to 3. So const creates a variable just like let, except we can't change its value later. This value stays constant. That's why it's called const. If we try to change its value, like variable2 equals 5, and then we save this, and we open this file in the browser by right-clicking, and then open with live server. And then open the console, so right-click, inspect, and then click the console. It will give us an error when we try to change this variable. So this doesn't work. Let's remove this line and save. So why would we ever use const instead of let? Well, const makes our code safer and easier to understand. When we create a variable with const, we know for sure that this variable will always contain 3. For let, however, if we create a variable, it's hard to know what value is inside this variable, because later on we can change this value in our code. So in order to keep our code safer, it's actually a best practice to use const by default, and only use let when we know that we need to change the variable. So here, it's actually best practice to use const to create this calculation variable, because we're not changing it later. Same thing for the result variable and the message variable. Now for variable 1, we have to use let because we're changing it later in this code. So that's const. It creates a variable that can't be changed later. Finally, the third way of creating a variable is to use another word, var. So at the bottom, we can type var space and then a variable name, like variable 3, and make it equal to 3. So var creates a variable just like let, and this variable can be changed later. Var is actually the original way to create variables in JavaScript. Var means variable. However, var has some issues that we'll learn later in this course. And because of these issues, we don't use var in new JavaScript code. You might see var in older JavaScript code, so it's still useful to know. So those are 3 ways to create variables in JavaScript: let, const, and var. We use const by default, and if we have to change a variable, then use let. So one more thing we're going to learn is that we can use type of with variables. So remember that type of tells us what type a value is. For example, if we wrote console.log type of 3 and save, type of will tell us that 3 is a number. Well, we can actually use type of with a variable. So if we change this to variable 2 and save, type of will tell us the type of value inside the variable, which is a number. And that's what we see in the console. Now let's check the type of this variable, message. So message contains a string. And if we do console.log type of message and save, this will tell us that the value inside the message variable is a string. So we can use type of to check the type of value that is saved inside a variable. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we learned about variables, which are a way to save values and use them later. We learned how to reassign a variable. We created the cart quantity feature of the final project. We learned some shortcuts for reassigning a variable. We learned some naming conventions and best practices for variable names. And we learned 3 ways to create a variable: let, const, and var. Here are some exercises to help you practice using variables. In this lesson, we're going to learn 2 more features of JavaScript called Booleans and if statements. And we're going to use these features to build this rock, paper, scissors project. Let's start by creating a new HTML file for this lesson. We're going to go to our code editor and click this icon to show our files, and then click this icon to create a new file. We're going to name this file 06-booleans.html and press enter. Let's open variables.html, and we're going to copy all this code into our new file. Let's select the code using Ctrl-A on Windows or Command-A on Mac, and then right-click, copy, and in here, right-click and paste. Let's close this for now and prepare this file for this lesson. So we'll scroll to the top and change this to Booleans, and then remove all the JavaScript code, but keep the script element. Now let's save and open this file in Live Server by right-clicking and then open with Live Server. And we can close the previous tabs as well as the previous code for now. We'll start by learning what are Booleans. So far in this course, we learned two types of values in JavaScript, numbers and strings. Booleans are another type of value in JavaScript. But Booleans are special because there are only two Boolean values, true and false. Let's click in the script element and type true. Press enter and type false. So these are the only two Boolean values that exist, true and false. So what's the purpose of Boolean values? A Boolean value represents whether something is true or false. For example, in JavaScript, we can compare two numbers. Let's create some new lines and type the code 3 less than 5. So this code checks whether the number 3 is less than 5. And of course, this is true. So if we console.log this code, console.log, and save, and then go to our website and open the console, right-click, inspect, and console, it will show us that the result of this code is the Boolean value true. Let's try another example. Let's delete this less than symbol and replace it with a greater than symbol. So now this code checks whether 3 is greater than 5. And we know that 3 is not greater than 5. So if we save, the computer will tell us that the result of this comparison is the Boolean value false. So as you can see, a Boolean value represents whether something is true or false. Now let's learn the syntax rules for Booleans. To create a Boolean, we just type true or false. Note that we don't surround these with quotes like this. If we surround them with quotes, this is now a string, not a Boolean. We can use type of to check this. So at the front, we can type console.log type of true. If we save, this will tell us that this is a string. Now, if we remove the quotes and save, this will tell us that this is now a Boolean. So when creating a Boolean, don't put quotes around true or false. Let's save. Now, one way to create a Boolean is to compare two numbers. For example, 3 greater than 5. So this greater than symbol is called a comparison operator. And there are many other comparison operators we can use. We saw less than earlier, and we also have greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, triple equals, which checks if two values are equal to each other, and exclamation double equals, which checks if two values are not equal to each other. Now, JavaScript is a little special because it has two ways to check if two values are equal, triple equals and double equals. The difference is that double equals tries to convert both values into the same type. For example, in our code, let's create some new lines and console.log, and let's check if the number 5 is equal to the string 5.00. If we save, it will tell us that these two values are equal to each other, even though one of them is a number and the other is a string. And that's because the double equals converts both values into the same type. So it converts both of these into the number 5 and then compares them. So that's why they are equal. However, this is not a good idea because this value is a number and this value is a string. It's a piece of text. So they shouldn't really be equal to each other. That's why in JavaScript, we always use the triple equals to check if two values are the same, so that we avoid the conversion behavior of double equals. So if we save, now it will tell us that these two values are not equal to each other. because one value is a number and the other value is a string. So this rule also applies to not equal to. In JavaScript, we always use exclamation double equals instead of exclamation equals to avoid the conversion behavior. All right, so those are comparison operators. In the order of operations, comparison operators have a lower priority than math. So if we did something like 5 and then minus 5, this would calculate 5 minus 5 first, which is 0, and then compare the two numbers. So 3 is now greater than 0. So if we save, the first comparison will now be true. So comparison operators have a lower priority than math operators. Now that we know what Boolean values are, we're going to combine them with a really useful feature called if statements. An if statement lets us write multiple groups of code and then decide which code to run. Let's do an example and create our first if statement. We're going to go to the bottom and create some new lines and type if and open bracket, close bracket, and open curly bracket, closed curly bracket. Between these round brackets, we're going to put a Boolean value like true. And in between the curly brackets, we're going to put some code to run. For example, console.log hello. So the way that an if statement works is that if this Boolean value is true, then we're going to run the code in the curly brackets. If this Boolean value is false, then we're not going to run the code. If we save, the value between the brackets is true, so we're going to run this code and display hello. Now if we change this to false and save, it will not run this code. So an if statement lets us decide whether or not to run some code based on this Boolean value. Now if statements have another useful feature called else. Let's go to the end of this if statement and type else, open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And then inside these curly brackets, we're going to put some different code like console.log else. The way else works is if this Boolean value is true, the computer will run this code. Otherwise, we will run the code inside else. Let's give it a try. We'll change this Boolean value to true and save. And because it is true, it will run this code and display hello. Now, if this Boolean value is false and save, because it is false, it will not run this code and it will run the code inside else and display else. So using if and else, we can write two groups of code and then decide which code to run. Now let's do a practical example. We're going to write some code to check if someone is old enough to drive. Let's go to the bottom and create some new lines. And we're going to type if, brackets, and curly brackets. And inside here, we're going to compare two numbers. The first number is a person's age. Let's pretend we have a person who is 30 years old. So we're going to type 30. Then we're going to check if this age is greater than or equal to the legal driving age. Let's pretend the legal driving age is 16. Notice that between the brackets, we don't have to just put a Boolean value. We can put any code that results in a Boolean value. So this comparison results in the Boolean value true. That means the computer will run the code between the curly brackets. So in here, let's type console.log you can drive. Now, if this is not true, let's run some different code. At the bottom, we'll type else and curly brackets. And then inside these brackets, we'll type console.log you cannot drive. Now let's save. And it will tell me that this person who is 30 years old can drive. If we go back and change this to a person that is 15 years old and save, this comparison will result in false. So it will display you cannot drive. So that's how we use if statements. We can write multiple groups of code for different situations and then decide which code to run. Now let's learn the syntax rules for if statements. To create an if statement, we type if, and then round brackets with a Boolean value inside. This is called the condition. If this condition is true, we will run the code inside the curly brackets. We can also add an else statement. This code will run if the condition is false. The else statement is optional. We don't have to have one. So these curly brackets and the code inside, these are called branches because it's like a tree branch. The code is splitting off into two directions, and we either run this code or we run this code. One more thing to know is in a branch, if we only have one line of code, the curly brackets are actually optional. So we can delete these and the code will still work. However, if we have more than one line of code in this branch, for example, if we add another line, console.log congrats, now this branch has two lines of code, so the curly brackets are mandatory. So we have to add them back. Now we're going to learn another feature of if statements, which is we can have more than one condition. For example, we're going to go to the end of this if branch and type else if, and then brackets and curly brackets. Else if lets us add another branch to our if statement. Between these round brackets, we can add another condition. For example, if a person is almost old enough to drive, let's display a different message. So inside this condition, let's check if this person's age, which is 15, is greater than or equal to 14. So we're checking if they are almost old enough to drive. And now inside the curly brackets, we're going to display a different message. Console.log almost there. So the way this works is that the if statement checks the conditions one by one. First, it checks if this is true. If it is, it will run this branch. Then it checks if this is true. If it is, it will run this branch. And if none of the conditions are true, it will run the else branch. So here, this condition is false, so we're not going to run this code. But now the second condition is true, so we're going to run this code. If we save, we display almost there in the console. So using else if branches, we can add as many conditions as we want to an if statement. The next thing we're going to learn is that we can combine if statements with variables from the previous lesson. For example, here we wrote the person's age 2 times. So we can actually save this age in a variable and then reuse that value. So above the if statement, let's create a variable using const, and let's name this variable age, and we'll make it equal to 15. Remember, the best practice for creating a variable is to use const by default, and only use let if we're going to change this value later. And now that we saved this number in a variable, we can use the variable inside the if statement. So we'll replace 15 with age, and here as well with age. So this will take whatever value is inside the variable and substitute it into the code. If we save, the if statement works the same way as before, and we run this line. Okay, now we're ready to use booleans and if statements to do a project. We're going to build a rock, paper, scissors game. First, let's take a look at the project. We're going to go to our browser, and at the top, create a new tab, and we're going to type here super simple.dev/projects/booleans and press enter. Here we can see a simple version of a rock, paper, scissors game. And if we click this link, it will take us to the final version of this game. So in this game, we can pick a move, and then the computer will pick a random move, and it will show us the result. And we also have a score of how many times we won, lost, and tied. So we're going to build this as we go through the course. But for now, let's go back, and we're going to start by building this simple version of the game. So how this simple version works is we click one of these buttons to pick a move. So let's pick rock. Then the computer will randomly pick a move. In this case, it's paper, but for you, it might be different. And it will compare the two moves and display the results in this pop-up. So the rules of rock, paper, scissors are rock beats scissors, paper beats rock, and scissors beats paper. Let's press OK, and we'll get started on this project. First, we'll create a new HTML file just for this project. Let's go to our code editor and click here and create a new file. And we're going to name this file 06-rock-paper-scissors.html and press enter. Next, let's copy all the code from booleans.html into this new file. So we'll open this again, and then Control A or Command A to select all the code, and then right click, copy, and in here, right click and paste. Let's close this and prepare this file. So we'll change this to rock, paper, scissors, and remove all of the JavaScript code that we had before. Finally, let's save and open this file in the browser by right-clicking and then open with Live Server. Let's take a look at the project again. So we're going to start by creating the text first, because this text is in the final version of the project. So in our HTML, we're going to create a paragraph element for this text. So less than p greater than, and the closing tag less than /p greater than. Inside our paragraph, we're going to have the text rock, paper, scissors. Next, let's create the buttons. So we'll go to our HTML and create a button. And inside this first button, we'll have the text rock. Let's create another button. This one will be paper, and we'll create the last button. This one will be scissors. Now let's save and check our new tab. And now we created all the elements that we need. Next, let's make these elements interactive with JavaScript. So when writing JavaScript, a good strategy is to think about what steps we need to do and then convert those steps into code. So here, when we click a button, the first step is the computer will randomly select a move, and then we're going to compare the moves to get the result. And finally, we'll display the result in a pop-up. By the way, this is called an algorithm. An algorithm is a set of steps to complete a task or to solve a problem. Now that we know what steps we need to do, we're going to convert these steps or this algorithm into code. First, we're going to run some JavaScript when we click these buttons. So let's use the onClick attribute again. We'll go to the opening tag of the button and type onClick equals double quotes. And then inside these double quotes, we can add our JavaScript. So now we have to figure out how to randomly select a move for the computer. To do this, we need to learn a new piece of JavaScript code. So here, we're going to type capital M math.random, open bracket, close bracket. Math.random generates a random number between 0 and 1. So if we console.log this, console.log, and save, and click this button, and then check in our console by right-clicking, inspect, and the console, it will display a random number between 0 and 1. If we click this button again, it will generate a different random number. So every time we run math.random, it generates a different random number between 0 and 1. Now, to be more precise, it actually generates a number greater than equal to 0 and less than 1. Now let's save this random number in a variable so we can use it later. So we'll replace the console.log with const and then a variable name. Let's just name it random capital N number and then equals. So we saved this random number inside this variable. Next, we need a way to convert this random number into a move, like rock, paper, or scissors. To do this, let's imagine the space between 0 and 1, and then divide the space into 3 equal parts. Each part represents a move. If we generate a random number and it's between 0 and 1/3, the move will be rock. If it's between 1/3 and 2/3, the move will be paper. And if it's between 2/3 and 1, the move will be scissors. This is how we can convert the random number into a move, and this will give the computer an equal chance of picking rock, paper, or scissors. Now let's convert these steps into code, and an if statement is the perfect solution for this. This already looks like an if statement. So in our onClick attribute, let's add some new lines and type if, brackets, and curly brackets. For this first condition, we're going to check if the random number is between 0 and 1/3. So let's check if random number is greater than or equal to 0. But in this case, we also need to check that random number is less than 1/3, because we're checking if the number is between 0 and 1/3. But how do we do this? How do we check that two comparisons are both true? To do this, we're going to learn another type of operator in JavaScript called logical operators. Logical operators let us combine Boolean values, which is what we need to do here. Let's go back into booleans.html, and we're going to learn logical operators. So first, let's open the tab for this file, and we're going to comment out all the previous code so our console doesn't get too messy. /*, and then at the bottom, */. Now let's create some new lines. And the first logical operator we're going to learn is called the AND operator. Let's type console.log a Boolean value true and another Boolean value true. So this is the AND operator, and it checks if two Boolean values are both true. So it checks if the left side is true and the right side is true. That's why it's called the AND operator. So here, the left side is true and the right side is also true. So the AND operator will result in true. If we save, this displays true. Now, if one of these sides is false, for example, if we change this to false. Now let's check, is the left side and the right side both true? In this case, no. So and will now result in false. If we save, it now displays false. So that's the logical AND operator. It checks if the left side is true and the right side is also true.